lecture about the gross morphology of the brain, that the brain is divided into three parts, mainly. It's based on its physiological development. We said that at the cranial part of the neural tube, we could have three main swellings. So we have three main swellings: the prosencephalon, the mesencephalon, and what's the last one in the neural tube? The rhombencephalon, the tail. Okay? In the prosencephalon, you will have the development which we later call it the forebrain. Okay? So 80% of the brain would be this structure, the forebrain, which is made of two structures, the cerebrum and diencephalon. Okay? Two structures within the cerebrum. That's what does diencephalon mean. Thalamus and hypothalamus. Below you will have the midbrain. Mesencephalon will develop into this small structure, the midbrain. Then the rhombencephalon part, belly, will be developed into what? Into three structures. Okay, we would call them, what we would call them? Behind the brain. Okay, behind the brain. Those would be the pons, which means the bridge, the medulla oblongata or the medulla oblongata. Both pronunciations are correct. And lastly, the cerebellum. Okay, cerebellum, we said, is 1/10 of the mass of the brain. Right? Ushur was in the brain, but yet it contains half number of neurons. Okay, 40 to 50 billion. Now, another term I told you, we imagine the brain to what? Or resemble it to what? A tree. Okay, so we will have the stem of this tree being this structure here. And this stem of the tree, which we refer to it as the brain stem. So the brain stem is the part of the brain that is composed of the midbrain superiorly, pons in the middle, and the medulla or the medulla inferiorly. Midbrain, pons, and medulla. And those are the structures which we're going to be speaking about today. Okay? Midbrain, pons, and medulla, there are three structures of the brain stem. Before we start speaking about each one of them, just in general to know what are the main functions for the brain stem.
Heart regulation.
The first important function is vital center. Okay. Yes, we will speak about that. But the most thing is a conduit. It's a canal. Okay, for ascending and descending tracts or fibers or nerve fibers or axons that are going down from the cerebral cortex, which are the motor ones, and the ones that ascend up into the cerebral cortex and cerebellum, which are also the sensory ones. Okay? In the brain stem, usually the descending tracts or the motor neurons, fibers, okay, or motor axons, usually located in the anterior part of the brain stem, while the ascending tracts, okay, are usually located where? In the posterior part of the brain stem. Okay, so this is the first function. It's a conduit, okay, for ascending and descending tracts of axons. Second thing, it contains aggregations of nerve cells, which we call them nuclei. It contains nuclei or aggregation of neurons that are responsible, or we call them the nuclei for cranial nerves. Okay, or the nerves that arise directly from the brain. So cranial nerves. So the cranial nerves emerges mostly, okay, or mainly, not all of them, most of them from where? From the brain stem. Okay? And here I have to explain something before we start speaking. I told you in the previous lecture we have 31 spinal nerves that arise directly from the spinal cord, and we have another 12 nerves, we call them cranial nerves. The old definition for cranial nerves used to be that nerves that arise directly from the brain and pass through cranial foramina. Okay? So they come from the brain and they pass through cranial foramina. Okay? However, this definition has been changed now. Why? It's mainly because the cranial nerve number 11. We have 12 nerves. Okay? If you want to know them, the first one we call it the olfactory, which is related to the sense of smell. Okay? The second one is the optic, which is related to the sense of vision. The third one we call it the trochlea. Okay, we will speak about it here. The oculomotor, sorry. The third one is the oculomotor, from ocular, vision, motor. So it's motor to the muscles of the eyeball, except two muscles. Okay. The fourth one is the trochlea, which is the smallest one. Okay, we will speak more about about it. It's for a specific muscle in the eyeball. We call it superior oblique, okay? The fifth is the largest, which is the trigeminal nerve, okay? Which is responsible for mainly sensation in the face, okay, and ears, and also responsible for the motor function of muscles of mastication, we call it. We have 4 muscles moving the mandible. So the muscles of mastication, okay? What else? 6 is the abducent, okay, which supplies another muscle for the eyeball. Once this nerve is active, it will lead to contract of the muscle that moves the eyeball laterally, abduction of the eyeball. That's why they call it the abducent, okay? Number 6 is the abducent. Number 7 is the facial, okay? Motor to the face, okay? Muscles of facial expression, how you move your lips, okay? You smile, you're angry, you elevate your eyebrows, all these movements by the facial. Number 8, the vestibulocochlear nerve, okay? Which is related to what? To equilibrium and hearing, okay? Number 9 is the glossopharyngeal, from its name, to the tongue and to the pharynx, okay? Glossopharyngeal. Number 10,
Vegas.
the vagus, which means the wandering nerve, which is responsible for parasympathetic innervation in the body. That's why they call it the wandering, traveling nerve, okay? Rahal, from the head to the neck, to the thorax, to the abdomen. Number 11, now here's the problem. 11 is the accessory nerve, the additional accessory. Okay? And number 12 is the hypoglossal, which moves the muscles of the tongue. Okay? Hypoglossal, I'm not going to go in details. Specifically, I was given instruction not to speak more in details about these cranial nerves, but just to explain it for you. 5 minutes only. The accessory nerve is the problem. Because previously, accessory nerve used to have 2 origins. Okay? The first origin is from the first 3 to 4 spinal segments, from the spinal cord. The other one from where? From the medulla oblongata. So it has a spinal and a cranial origin. Okay? They used to call them cranial root and spinal root. Okay? And that's why the definition of cranial nerves was nerves that arise directly from the brain and pass through cranial foramen. Okay? Now, in recent years, they decided that the cranial origin of the accessory nerve is no longer part of the accessory nerve. And they actually added to what? To the vagus nerve. Okay? To the vagus, which is the part that is responsible for innervation or motor innervation for the muscles of the palate, okay, the larynx, and that region. Okay? So they added to the vagus nerve. So it's now part of the vagus nerve. So now the accessory is called just spinal accessory. Okay? Nerve. Okay? And its origin where? Only from the spinal cord. And it's specialized only in moving or innervation to 2 muscles, which we call them reference muscles. مرجعيات in the neck. Those are the SCM, sternocleidomastoid, and the trapezius. Okay? Now, the definition isn't changed. So when you ask about the cranial nerves, those are actually the nerves that pass through cranial foramen only. They are not nerves arising directly from the brain. Because when we speak about cranial nerves, 11 of them arise from the brain, except one, which is number 11, the accessory. It arises actually where? From the spinal cord. However, some textbooks, let's say, and some other writers did not agree with this definition. For example, the Snell, okay, like in your book, your textbook. So they still refer to the accessory sometimes as cranial root and spinal root. So just to make sure that there is no confusion in this. Okay? So whether you hear the word spinal accessory, this they mean that the accessory nerve which arises only from the spine for the new definition. Or you sometimes instead you will see that he's speaking about spinal root of accessory and cranial root of accessory. Okay? Okay, so now, why we spoke about this, remind me again, yes, for the main function. So the function, one of the functions of the brain stem is that cranial nerves from 3 to 12, with the exception of 11, arise from the brain stem. Number 1, the olfactory. Number 2, the optic are usually related to the cortex, to the cerebral cortex, like the vision in the occipital lobe, okay? And the olfaction usually in the inferior medial part of the temporal lobe, okay? So those are related or located, their nuclei in the cerebral cortex. But 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, and 12. We jump the 11, okay? From 3 to 12, okay? with exception of 11, they arise from where? From the brainstem. So first, brainstem is a conduit for ascending and descending tracts. It contains nuclei for cranial nerves. The third function, it contains nuclei for very important vital functions, as your colleague said. Like, for example, in the medulla oblongata, there are a center for respiration, okay, and a center for cardiovascular system. The pons, there are also a center for arousal, the wake-sleep cycle, okay? The center of arousal, when you wake up from sleep, is located usually in the pons. So, these are the three main functions for the brainstem, okay? Speaking first about the midbrain. When we look to the midbrain, so this is the brainstem here. You can see this is the thalamus, part of the diencephalon. So this is the midbrain, pons, medulla oblongata. If you look to the midbrain anteriorly here, you will see that it's made of a depression in the middle and two swellings were laterally, okay? These two swellings, which we refer to them usually as the crus cerebri, or in other words, the cerebral peduncles. Both are correct because you look to it from anterior. Let me explain to you why both are correct. Scientists decided to divide the midbrain based on this canal here. The cerebral aqueduct. Aqueous duct, a duct moving aqueous fluid, which is the CSF, from the third ventricle down to the fourth ventricle. So in the cerebral aqueduct, anterior to it, all this part of midbrain, we would call it the cerebral peduncle. Okay? Peduncle is the smaller of pedicle. Like in vertebra, you hear the word pedicle. Pedicle is a Latin word which means the foot, because it resembles the foot. Okay? So they call it the cerebral peduncle. So anterior to the cerebral aqueduct in midbrain, you will have two cerebral peduncles, right and left. Okay? Okay? Now midbrain, in this image, if you look to the midbrain, it's inclined anteriorly, okay? So it's not going vertical or perpendicular, okay? Since it's inclined, its posterior part, this here, behind the cerebral aqueduct, is more or less forming a roof, okay? Because it's inclined. So they call the posterior part behind the cerebral aqueduct as what? As the tictum, okay? Tictum means the roof, okay? So behind the cerebral peduncle, all this part is the tictum, the roof. All this part here is cerebral peduncles, okay? Now, further divisions. In the cerebral peduncle itself, if you look carefully, you will see that it's divided into three areas. The most anterior area is a bulge made completely of white matter. What's the white matter? Myelinated atoms, which are mainly the descending tracts, okay? Corticospinal, corticobulbar, whatever you, corticopontine, these all descending tracts from the cerebral cortex going down into the brainstem and spinal cord. So they are located mostly anteriorly in this white matter. And they call it usually, because now when you look anterior to it, those two bulges, this one and this one. So they decide to call it the crus cerebri. What does crus mean? You heard of the right and left crus of the diaphragm? Yes. Crus means leg. Okay, so those are the legs. They are resembling the legs of what? Of the cerebrum here, of the brain. That's why they call them the cerebral legs or crus cerebri. Okay? Cerebral crura. So these are the crus cerebri. So within the cerebral peduncle, the most anterior part, the white matter here, is crus cerebri. What is crus cerebri? Descending white matter tracts. Okay? Behind it, there is what here now? A gray matter. Pure white matter, pure gray matter here. This gray matter here, which is more black in color, they call it, what's this? Substantia nigra. Okay? Substantia, substance, nigra, which means black. The black substance. This is the black substance. Black substance because the nerve cells here are rich in what? Rich in melanin pigmentation. Okay? But the neurotransmitter here is dopamine. Okay? So remember this. The nerve cells here are rich, their cytoplasm is rich in the pigmentation of melanin. That's why they look more black in color. But the neurotransmitter here is dopamine. And when you have problem in these cells, you have degeneration, okay, or damage, you will have a common disease known as Parkinson's. So, crus cerebri, the white matter, behind it the gray matter, which we call it substantia nigra. Behind now, شوفوا شو بصير? Pure white, pure gray, mixed area. This area here is mixed with white matter and gray matter. Okay? ففي nerve cells وفي myelinated axons. Okay? This area, which resembles the second floor, since it's inclined, resembles the second floor, okay, or the upper floor of the midbrain. So they call it the tegmentum. So this area is the tegmentum. Tegmentum means the upper roof floor, okay, which means بالعربي يسموه السقيفة, السدة. Okay, so you have first floor here, those two, then you have the tegmentum. After here you will have the roof, the tectum. Okay, so in the tegmentum you will have very important structures like nuclei of cranial nerves, like this one. This is the cranial nerve number 3, the oculomotor nerve. Okay, which is responsible for moving your eyeball. Okay, it supplies in the eyeball. We have 7 muscles. Okay, 7 muscles. Okay. Those muscles, mostly 5 of them innervated by oculomotor. The remaining 2, SO4, LR6, are innervated by the trochlear and rabbit abducent cells. Okay? So, the oculomotor nerve, which is responsible for movements of the eyeball. In anterior to it, there is a very important nucleus here, but it's more reddish in color. We call it the red nucleus. Red nucleus because it's reddish. Why it's reddish? Because the cytoplasm of the cells here is rich in iron-containing pigments, okay, and also highly vascularized area, okay. So there is vascularity and there is what? Iron-containing pigments here. That's why it's more reddish. Its main exact function until now is not determined, but it's for sure related with what? Because of its association, it's related with motor coordination. So it's not a sensory function, it's a motor function. Okay, in the red nucleus. So you can see we have nuclei, gray matter in the tegmentum. We have also some white matter areas. Okay, these now, حكينا هذول descending in motor. Okay, which going down. Okay, to the medulla and to the spinal cord. The white matter here are the ascending tracts, which taking the sensory, okay, back way to the cerebral cortex, or association fibers to the cerebral cortex. So, for example, here this is called the medial meniscus. If you heard about the dorsal medial meniscus pathway, which is responsible for fine touch and proprioception. Okay? The medial meniscus. This is for the cerebral peduncle. إذا الcerebral peduncle تتكون من crus cerebri, substantia nigra, and tegmentum. Okay? Behind there is what? The cerebral peduncle, the tectum. If you look to the tectum now, in this view, posteriorly, okay, we look here in the tectum. This is the tectum of the midbrain. You will see that there is small elevations there, 2 superior, 2 inferior. Those elevations we call them the colliculi. Superior colliculus, inferior colliculus. Colliculus is a Latin word that means head, telling. Okay, فعندكم small heads or small areas. They are located there because of this bulging, because of the presence of aggregation of nerve cell bodies, nuclei, okay, there. Those, the superior colliculus usually is related to the function of vision. It's usually related with the consensual light reflex. لما بتحط الضوء على العين بتشوفوا انه في constriction في الأفق، صح؟ بس انت بتكون حاطه على العين الشمال او اليمين مثلا، بتشوف العين بتجيها الاخرى برضه، بصير فيها constriction. This is because there is a coordination. This coordination usually between the 2, okay, pupils happen within the superior colliculus. The inferior colliculus شو لها علاقة بإيش؟ Auditory pathway. As the neurons ascend, okay, through, okay, into when بيروح أول؟ الثالاموس. Relay station for sensory pathway حكيت لكم. من الثالاموس وين الآن بنقرر توديهم auditory pathway؟ Where the auditory area? Middle of the superior temporal channels. Okay. So as you're hearing me talking now, my voice is going through the vestibulocochlear nerve, العصب الثاني, all the way ascending. Okay, vestibulocochlear located at the junction of medulla here and pons. بدخل وبيطلع للinferior colliculus. The inferior colliculus, it will go to the thalamus here, from the thalamus to the superior of here. temporal gyrus. Okay? The auditory pathway. So, in a lateral view now, if you look to the midbrain, and I ask you to define the three main structures for midbrain, you will tell me in the middle or more posteriorly, you will have the cerebral aqueduct, صح? Anterior to the cerebral aqueduct, all this structure شو سميناه? Cerebral peduncle, and this one, the dictum. This superior elevation on the dictum, superior colliculus, okay, with visual pathway, okay, consensual light reflex. The lower one, inferior colliculus, function, part of the auditory pathway, okay. It's a station in the auditory pathway. I've talked about this. If you look in a cross section in the midbrain, you have two sections. In the upper part, okay, you will have the cranial nerve. What's this? Okay. In the upper part, you will have what in the cross section? You will have the crus cerebri, substantia nigra, and tegmentum. In the tegmentum, the mixed area, you will have the oculomotor nerve nuclei, cranial nerve number 3. Clear? You will have the red nucleus related to the motor function. Those are the gray matter areas. And you will have what? White matter here, which we call it res ribbon, medial meniscus. Okay? The medial meniscus. Okay? I will speak more about it. Why the red nucleus is reddish in color? Iron, protein, pigments, and vascularity. Now, if you go caudally, you will see that the red nucleus disappeared, the oculomotor disappeared, but another nucleus here for another cranial nerve. رقم 4 شو هو؟ The trochlea. اللي حكيت راح احكي لكم عنه. Trochlear nerve. This is the nucleus of the trochlear nerve. Trochlear nerve has three main specificities. First one, it's the most cylinder cranial nerve. أرفع واحد. فيهم 12. Okay? يعني you can say it's the smallest. Okay? Second thing, it's the only cranial nerve to emerge from the posterior aspect of the brain. The cranial nerves معظمهم بيطلعوا anterior or anterolateral. Okay? The only one that goes from posterior here, if you look posteriorly, this is the dictum. You see this nerve? It goes posterior, then turns around to go anteriorly. Okay? This is the trochlea. So trochlea is the smallest. It's the only one to arise from posterior aspect. It's the only cranial nerve to decussate, to cross over to the opposite side. Okay? So if you see here, one of them here going posteriorly, then it decussates to the opposite side. The right one goes to the left, and the left one goes to the right side. All remaining cranial nerves, look the oculomotor, they stay ipsilateral in the same side. The right oculomotor contains the eyeball muscles in the right side, but the right trochlea controls the superior oblique muscle, the SO4, or the eyeball muscle on the left side. Okay? So, trochlear nerve nucleus, where it is in the lower part of midbrain. Okay, it's the smallest cranial nerve. It's the only one to decussate. It's the only one to arise from the posterior aspect of the brain. Okay. So when I ask you about the nuclei in the midbrain, first you tell me cranial nerve nuclei are cranial nerve number 3 superiorly, cranial nerve number 4 inferiorly. Any other nucleus there? Red nucleus in the tegmentum, substantia nigra, which separates the crus cerebri from the tegmentum. Okay? So, quick review. Anterior part of midbrain, شو سميناه? Cerebral peduncle. Posterior part, dictum. Okay? Internally, في عندي cranial nuclei 2 شو هم؟ 3 و4 oculomotor metropolia. Okay? في عندي also caudally في nucleus اللي هي ايش؟ لا superiorly 2 nuclei اللي هم red nucleus والاوكيولوموتور. Red nucleus في الupper part of midbrain. في lower part, the nucleus in the caudal part is the trochlea, and there is a decussation for the cerebellum. We call it superior cerebellar peduncle. Okay? We will speak more details about it. Vascular regions now. أخذت vascularity. The main blood supply to the midbrain comes from posterior cerebral artery. But in the posterior cerebral, you look to it here. This is the posterior cerebral. Okay? It goes around the midbrain to go to بيلف حوالين الميدبرين بيروح للأوكسيبيتال لوب. To supply the occipital lobe of the cerebrum. Okay, as it passes, it will supply the midbrain. Now, if you have an occlusion or damage to the posterior cerebral artery, you will have what? Ischemic necrosis, okay, in specific regions in the midbrain. If the necrosis involved anterior part here, as you see, which will be in the crus cerebri, descending motor tract, okay, and part of the oculomotor nerve, you know. In this case, we will call it the Weber's syndrome, okay. الحاجتين بينتجوا من دمج لايش؟ للposterior cerebral artery or ischemic necrosis. The first one is Weber's, the second one is Benedict. In Weber's syndrome, the damage will be to the crus cerebri and to the oculomotor nerve in that side. In this case, لما يتدمر الاوكيلوموتور nerve شو بده يصير عندك؟ حكينا وظيفة من اسمه oculomotor movement of the eyeball بتروح. اوكي؟ فبصير ايش؟ ophthalmoplegia. Ophthalmoplegia اللي هي paralysis in the eyeball. Okay? In this paralysis, in this ophthalmoplegia, and it بصير الدور يعني. In this ophthalmoplegia, it will be ipsilateral ولا contralateral? Ipsilateral. Okay? لأنه cranial nerve do not dissociate. The only one dissociates is the trochlea. صح. بصير ophthalmoplegia. شو كمان بصير؟ بصير lateral deviation to the eyeball. ليش بتروح؟ عشان النيرف نمبر 6 الكرينيال نيرف نمبر 6 اللي موجود وين هذا؟ موجود في البونز، اوكي؟ هذا بيغذي ايش؟ اللاترال ريكتاس اسمها اللي هي بتحرك الايبول لاترال ابدكشن. فهذا ستيل فانكشنينج، all the other ones اللي بالانسنج اوكي؟ شو بصير فيهم؟ باراليسيس، فالايبول بتروح لاترال ديفيشن، فالاوفتالموبليجيا لاترال ديفيشن بصير عندكم ايش كمان؟ توسيس، دروبينج من ذا ابر ايلid. لانه برضه المصل اللي بترفع الايلid اللي بتخليك تفتح عيونك لما تصحى من النوم is the levator palpebris superioris muscle اللي بيغذيها الاوكيولوموتور. اوكي؟ the oculomotor nerve. شو المصل اللي بتخليك لما تنام من عيونك؟ orbicularis oculi. صح. اوكي؟ so the muscle to close your eyes orbicularis oculi motor innervation fascia cranial nerve. Number 7. With opening levator palpebris superioris cranial nerve number 3, oculomotor. When you have damage, the eyelid will drop down. Lastly, you will have a dilated pupil. مش راح ادخل في الديتيلز، راح تاخذوها في النيورو اناتومي 2. Contralateral paralysis of the muscles بسبب الدمج للكراس سيريبري. قبل ما هاي الكورتيكو سباينال تراك تنزل وتعمل ديكوسيشن اللي ضل لهم يعني. كيف بتعمل ديكوسيشن؟ فهي قبل ديكوسيشن. فالليفت سايد اذا دمج في الكراس سيريبري معناته دمج بيروح لوين؟ الباراليسيس في الرايت سايد. Okay, in your upper and lower limbs. فcontralateral هي المين things. ophthalmoplegia, ipsilateral. شو كمان؟ paralysis to the muscles of the upper and lower limb, contralateral. Okay? There will be contralateral paralysis. In Benedict syndrome اللي بيصير الدم يشوفه مش للموتور تراكت، بيصير للاسندنج سنسوري تراكت اللي هي اسمها ميديال ليمينيسكس. اوكي؟ الميديال ليمينيسكس الديكوسيشن بيصير وين عادة؟ برضه في الميدولا اوبلونجاتا. دام. فإذا الدمج في الليفت سايد هي صار ميديال ليمينيسكس you will have what paresthesia or anesthesia in the contralateral side. مش paralysis في المسلز بصير ايش؟ paresthesia or anesthesia. هيمي anesthesia بسموه لأنه نصف واحد من okay? This is happened in the Benedict syndrome. Pons. Now when we speak about the pons, حكيت لكم شو يعني pons؟ ليش سموه bridge؟ Because it's bridging the two cerebral hemispheres with each other and with the cerebrum above. Okay? It's the middle part of the brain stem. الفانكشنز تاعيته حكيت لكم اول شيء كنتين لما تطلعوا عليه شوفوا اصلا الفايبرز ماشي ايش؟ transversely. لاحظوا انه very convex محدب bulging anteriorly from side to side where you can see many transverse fibers that go and merge laterally here to become a small peduncle. We call it the middle cerebellar peduncle. Middle cerebellar peduncle. Cerebrum located where posterior behind the pons and medulla oblongata. To communicate with other parts of the brain, it sends what? Nerve fibers, tracts. Those nerve fibers, one superiorly, to communicate with midbrain and cerebral cortex above. فبيسموها ايش؟ superior cerebellar peduncle. Okay? واحدة بتروح دغري to communicate with the pons من فوق بتروح عند البونز. Okay? communicate with the pons. تيجي من هون ومن هون. يسموها الميدل سيربيلار بيدانكل. والثالث اللي بتروح inferior للميدولا والسباينال كورد. يسموها ايش؟ inferior cerebellar peduncle. ففي السيريبرم في السيربيلار اوكي we have 3 peduncles اوكي 3 legs or foot superior to the midbrain, middle to the pons, inferior to the medulla oblongata. اوكي the transverse fibers هاي بتشوفوها mainly in the pons anteriorly. Those are usually the ones that are going to converge to become the middle cerebellar peduncle, okay, which communicates with the pons. If you look to the bones, okay, in an anterior view, it's convex حكيتلكم من side لside, okay, وعامل ايش؟ عامل many transverse fibers. Those transverse fibers will go to become the middle cerebellar peduncle اللي بتروح على السيربيلم. In the middle there is a shallow groove for what? For the basilar artery. Okay? So we call it the basilar groove. لأنه بتعرفوا المين blood supply للبرين two arteries اللي هم مين؟ Vertebrals, internal carotids. If you divide the brain obliquely into superior anterior, which is mainly, in other words, the forebrain, cerebrum and diencephalon, and posterior inferior, which includes midbrain and hindbrain. Okay, this will be in the forebrain. Blood supply mainly من internal carotid. In the lower part, mid and hindbrain, the blood supply from the vertebrals. Vertebrals بيطلعوا من وين؟ من السبكليفيال artery، بدخلوا في الترانسفيرس فورامينا of cervical vertebrae لحد الفورامين magnum. Okay, they enter the foramen magnum and pass on the sides of the medulla, here and here, until the junction of the bones. The two vertebral arteries now will join in a large artery. We call it basilar. الباسيلار بيمشي على البونز لحد الجنكشن مع الميدبرين. At the junction of midbrain, it will terminate into two arteries. شو بسميهم؟ posterior cerebral arteries. Okay? And this is for the posterior inferior part of the brain. The other ones will be coming from the internal carotids. Okay? So here on the bones, you always remember you will find the basilar artery. Okay? Also, in addition to that, anterolaterally, you will have the largest cranial nerve arising from within the bones. اللي هو رقم 5. حكينا 3 و4 من وين؟ من الميد برين. 5 و6 و7 ونص 8 من البونز. اوكي؟ النصف الاخر من 8 و9 و10 و12 من الميدولا. اوكي؟ الان this is the largest number 5 which we call it the trigeminal nerve. The trigeminal nerve, cranial nerve number 5, لما بيطلع له 2 roots, a small medial root which is the motor root for muscles of mastication. Okay, mainly. هو بيغذي 8 muscles of mastication 4 وفي 4 غيرهم. Okay, for muscles of mastication, and the large sensory root which goes to the sensation of the face. Okay, so large sensory and small motor root. Posteriorly, لما تطلع posteriorly, you cannot see the bones posteriorly. What you can see actually is the cerebellum. So you have to cut and remove the cerebellum. Okay? Once you remove the cerebellum, you will see that you will have a cavity here. And this is the floor for that cavity, which is the fourth ventricle. Okay? So you can see the cavity of the fourth ventricle. The cavity of the fourth ventricle is more or less rhomboid in shape. معينية, as you see. Okay? This rhomboid shaped cavity, or in other words, we call it the floor of what? Of the fourth ventricle. Okay? بما انها depression فبيسموها rhomboid fossa. So the rhomboid fossa is the same meaning of floor of the fourth ventricle. Is usually located, okay, on the posterior surface of the bones and below medulla oblongata. فلو تقسموا المعين بالنص من هون, as you see, or as they do here, okay, the upper half of the rhomboid fossa or the floor of the fourth ventricle is the posterior surface of the bones. The lower half here, yes, the posterior surface of the medulla oblongata. Okay? Now, if you look to the upper half of the fourth ventricle or the rhomboid fossa, which is in other words the posterior surface of the bones. First, راح تشوفوا فيه deep sulcus بالميدل. Okay? شايفينه هذا الخط؟ And as we go down, it's more deeper. فبيسموها الميديان in the middle, median sulcus. Beside the median sulcus, there is the altitudinal swellings, medial eminence, which contain tracts or myelinated nerve axons. Okay? the medial eminence. The lower part of the medial eminence now, شايفينها هاد كلها is expanded bone, صار rounded shape. This round shape, inferior expansion of the medial eminence, we would call it the facial colliculus. تلت الفيشيال نيرف، لأن حكيت لكم في البونز عندكم شو الكرينيال نيرف؟ 5 الترايجيمينال، 6 الابيديوسنت، 7 الفيشيال، ونص الثمانية الستيبلوكوبيا. 7 الفيشيال موجود في البونز. لما بيطلع الفيشيال نيرف، okay, if you look to the facial nucleus, it's located more anterior, okay, 7 فوقيها الابيديوسنت.